6-1, radio check.
Reaper 6-1, Godfather, Hatchet, Lima Charlie, send traffic.
Godfather, Reaper Element 60 is established at checkpoint 36 Zulu.
Reaper 6-1, there are no changes to Bug 307. All report received from last comm window. You are clear to neutralize enemy element in kill box 6 Zulu 85. Secondary mission set is to provide any new imagery of troop movements in that sector. Provide BDA when able.
Reaper 6-1 copies all. Call when established.
Godfather copies all. Godfather out.
Target destroyed.
Reaper 6-1, be advised, we are contact 1 squadron moving west from initial strike. You're approved for immediate re-attack on the squadron. Provide an update when engagement complete.
Godfather, Reaper 6-1 copies all.
Contact! Let's move! Leave the bag! Taking cover! Over!
Reaper 6-1, there is cover 50 meters to your northwest. Reaper 6-1 copies all. Moving to cover.
We good? We're good.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out another Hatchet Cast episode, and today we're going to be covering episode 1 of a 3-part series regarding drones. Now this episode is specifically going to be focused on team concepts, like a 2-man or 3-man or 4-man drone team, what that looks like, how drone teams will be employed. I also have a couple of guests that came on the channel and actually gave an interview. We had QUADTAC Systems, who actually makes the the arm to be able to hook your FPV goggles to your helmet on a Rhino mount, and also Ascend ISR, who makes a thermal covering for drones of all different sizes. Now, I will tell you, this episode, to include the others, are extremely heavy on the information side and not so much on the entertainment side. There's a lot that's gonna be thrown at you. I was like trying to figure out what to cut out and try to make it look, and I'm like, dude, there's just so much information. It's so important and so packed in there that I think everyone who's a prepared citizen that truly believes in training needs to know this type of stuff. Before we get started, as always, guys, thank you so much for your support of the channel. A great way to support the channel for free is hit the like and the subscribe button. Also, if you know someone that's looking into getting into drones, or you think this is a great thing to share with your buddies to kind of get that information out there, make sure you share this video with a friend. Also, go follow QUADTAC Systems and Ascend ISR. They have tons of knowledge that they put out on their own channels. Another great way to help out the channel is if you are in the market for some gear, go check out one of our sponsors, WetWorks. He makes tons of great plate carriers, a lot of the low vis concealment options as well. In the third episode, we're gonna be talking about the WetWorks Wraith ghillie suit hood. And also, if you are wanting to train with us, go check out our 2025 training calendar. We have it up on the website. Love taking classes with you guys. But without further ado, you guys, I'm gonna go ahead and roll right into it. We're gonna start off talking about the team construct. The emphasis of this episode is to focus on the drone team concept, how that drone team is employed, some drone tactics that are currently being used that are very well known and were found on open source resources, and also talk about some employment methods and things to consider. After we talk about some tactics, I have Felix from QUADTAC System, who makes the actual helmet mount for the goggles, and Ascend ISR, who makes signature reduction panels for drones and goggles. They are going to be joining us in the discussion talking about this very topic. So I want to talk about the different team constructs in terms of 2-man, 3-man, and 4-man teams and the pros and cons between those three different sizes. Now, a 2-man team is going to be TOC dependent or Tactical Operations Center dependent. So you have a FPV pilot and you also have an alternate pilot. Now, the FPV pilot will be piloting the scout drone. He will also be piloting the first-person view drone, such as this one, the DJI Avata, one that we saw very similarly in that short film, where he utilizes the FPV drone first to be able to strike a target, and then also utilizes a scout drone to drop ammunition. Now, he was being guided by a separate drone that was a larger drone that was being flown back at the TOC or at headquarters, aka the Tactical Operations Center. So that TOC was supporting that 2-man team with additional reconnaissance, feed, and ISR. Now, the alternate pilot, who is also pulling security, has the shotgun, and he was in charge of launch and recovery of the drone, as well as doing communications while the drone pilot is actually flying the craft, because he can't take his hands off the controller, so he can't push the push-to-talk to be able to respond to radio traffic. However, he is able to hear everything that is going on the net. Now, this is a good sized team if you're trying to go out in a small element, but also it's going to be a lot more dependent on the host force that it attaches to. So this 2-man team would be an enabler team. That would be the bare bones team. Like that, this is the minimum. You don't want to have less than 2 that attach to another unit, so that way they can provide expertise on drones, they can provide expertise on counter UAS or counter drone tactics. They can also allow the team to have a qualified FPV drone and a scout drone to provide support and attack for their unit. Like I said, if they go out on their own, they're going to be heavily TOC dependent. So they have a smaller size element. However, smaller size element, a lot quieter, a lot smaller footprint, but needs more support from outside sources. Now, the next size team that I was researching was the 3-man team. Now, the 3-man team is capable of going on a solo recon. It's a very small force. However, they would also play a big role as an enabler attachment. So that 3-man team would be attached to whatever unit requests them. What this is going to do is also provide more situational awareness to that drone team because they have an additional person. So you would have your FPV pilot, you would have your recon pilot who would also be the team lead and directing the FPV pilot on direction. So the recon drone would fly up and direct that FPV towards its targets. And then you would also have the alternate pilot or the alternative pilot. So if the FPV pilot gets killed, there is another pilot that's able to take his place, and he would play the security element as well as launch and recovery and communications that would assist the team leader. The team leader would also be hooked to communications and relaying to the alternate pilot any type of traffic that needs to be passed. This one's a pretty standard type team, but the heavy base team, which is the 4-man team, is obviously the most ideal, right? So you have, if you were attached to a unit, now you have the ability to have drone pilots come on in shifts. So you could have a good shift schedule. You could also have high situational awareness and very fast response. So you have your FPV pilot, you would have your recon pilot who would also be the team leader. You would have the alternative pilot or the alternate pilot. He would also be in charge of security and communications, helping out the team leader. And then you have the drone pilot apprentice who would be providing additional security, would take care of launch and recovery, electronic warfare countermeasures, so EW, and he would be the munitions specialist. So he would be able to attach those munitions to the drone and assist the team in that manner. He's also going to be soaking up as much knowledge and is going to be the newest guy to the team. So he would be learning the ropes, if you will, about UAV piloting and FPV flying. Now, what's great about the 4-man team is obviously you have more SA, you have more people to kind of help assist with that job. Problem is, if they go out, it's going to be a larger element and a little bit easier to detect. So the biggest things that we want to consider is not only how is the team employing these drones, but how as a force, if they have an attached drone team to them, how are they going to employ the drone team, and what is that drone team going to do to shape the battlefield? So this is where we're going to go into the employment techniques that are known. Understand these employment techniques were found on open source and are not giving away any type of classified material. You can find this stuff on the internet, but I think it's really cool for us to see. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. Hey guys, so hopefully you're enjoying this video. Real quick, I want to talk about a product from Wetworks that I really enjoy. I've had this actually for about maybe 2 to 3 years, but it's an amazing product and I want to talk to you guys about it. And obviously Wetworks is one of the sponsors of the channel. It allows you guys to be able to watch this type of content for free without charge. And so let me go ahead and talk to you about this piece of kit that I really like. So I'd like to introduce you guys to the Pathfinder 7. Now this is a heavy chest rig loadout. I've been running this for quite some time. You may have even seen it in other videos. Now, what's really cool about the Pathfinder 7 is there's MOLLE all on the front of that, and there's also 7 mag cells on this. So I can carry 7 mags, plus if I have 1 in the rifle, that gives me a total of 8 mags without even thinking about stuff that I have on the back end. Cool thing is about this, it does have Velcro in the back, so that way I can run a ghost map pouch, but you can also run a dump pouch, so you have extra storage. And this does have elastic as far as where the mag cells are at, and then you also have holes here, so if you want to add a bungee retention pull tab, you can do that. This thing can hold so much equipment, and if you guys know anything about obviously heavy rig loadouts, which I'm sure you guys do, if you are going to have a first line of kit, having as much as you can on your chest, say for example you lose your bag or whatever happens, at least you have the ability to fight, survive, and be an asset with what's on your body. So this is obviously good for really long hauls, long-term recce missions where you have to have a lot of sustainment for a longer period of time. But this is an incredible product. Like I said, I've been running it for a long time. I've also used it in my other line of work. As far as the pouches on here, because there's MOLLE on the front of that, I could actually put the Lunar Concept Guppy pouches on there, and you can actually get those from Wiseman Company as well. Really nice, just a general purpose pouch, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of those, as well as being able to hook up my radio and a dangler. So super capable piece of kit. If you guys are interested in any of their chest rig, they also have different size chest rigs, whether it's a 5-cell or smaller, and they also have the Pathfinder with a split rig option. So make sure you guys use the discount code. Save some money. Go check out Wetworks. He's an amazing company. They're out of Texas. It's a husband and wife that run that business, and they have high quality control. Really cool product that I wanted to highlight for you guys from Wetwork. Special thanks to Wetwork for sponsoring this video. In the military, we have what's called sand tables, but this is a way for me to demonstrate kind of how different basic tactics are being developed with FPV drones. This is a classic method. So we have the FPV pilot, we have the FPV drone, we have the recon pilot, and the recon drone. Now this is just a classic method. So what will happen is you'll have the recon drone is going to spot a target set. So he'll spot that target set and then pass that information on to the FPV drone guy who's in another location, and then utilize the FPV to attack the target. What the recon drone is going to do is actually provide one target talk-on to the target set for the FPV, and then also provide live BDA or battle damage assessment to see, hey, do we need to re-attack this target, or was that a successful strike? So this is going to be your most classic type of drone tactic that is used by a lot of drone teams. This is initially what we saw very early on in the war over in Europe, and now we're seeing it pretty heavily in all different types of conflicts. This is what's called the free hunting tactic. So now we have a drone operator team, could be a two-man team, could be, just a smaller team size, and they're operating out of a forward area and utilizing FPV drones. Now there is no recon drone for this. However, what's happening is now they are using FPV drones to hunt targets of opportunity. So here we have a supply depot, obviously trying to hit that logistics piece. We have another, maybe an open armor element that's been discovered. And so we're going to have multiple FPVs, one at a time, launched at different targets of opportunity. So one of the big things, though, that is kind of a risk with this is it's very similar to shoot, move, communicate. Like if a sniper takes a shot, what'll end up happening is they'll be able to track where that shot's coming from over time, and then do either a counter strike or a counterattack on that sniper. So now with the advancement of electronic warfare, we have direction finding capability where they can actually detect where the radio signal is coming from. So this is a kind of a more risky attack because you're sending FPVs out one at a time to strike targets of opportunity. They can direction find that and either send artillery back towards where that radio signal is coming from, or even worse, utilize a drone to counterattack the FPV drone team. So this is one called the free hunting, but is definitely a more common tactic that we're seeing being used in different conflicts around the globe. This next tactic is called the swarm. Now this will be used in conjunction with a recon drone element. So there would be a recon drone pilot who is going to be coordinating and providing real-time BDA, real-time target talk-on to maybe a convoy or a enemy element formation. So what will happen is you'll have multiple FPV drone operators on this, so more than one, you'll probably have a couple of them, and they will be swarming that convoy with FPV drones, trying to hit as many targets as possible, probably going for the armor at first, and then once those armor pieces dismount, say for example a BMP or an infantry fighting vehicle, then you'll have the FPVs then go after the individual groups or even individual soldiers, depending on how intense the FPV swarm is going to be. So we see this tactic used quite a bit, especially on armor columns or infantry troops out in the open with infantry fighting vehicles. So really deadly attack, very basic one, and then the recon element will either also, if need be, do this in conjunction with other fires, say for example FPV drone swarm along with artillery strikes and mortar strikes. This next one is where we have some almost pre-assault fires that are used to force that's attacking a compound or a trench. So what will happen is you'll see the recon drone pilot will be directing an FPV swarm in order to support a element that is attacking a position. So whether that's a bunker, whether they're attacking a like a trench system or something of that nature. So it'll be almost like pre-assault fires and covering fire. The attacking element is proceeding to go and assault this fighting position. So you'll have FPV drones that will actually physically go and try to take out target areas inside the trench system or inside that fighting position to kind of soften it up. This can be done in conjunction with, artillery fire and some other things of that nature. So that way that friendly element can move forward without having a high casualty rate. Understand this is making essentially the defenders' lives absolutely miserable because they're going to have accurate fire and they have an assault group that's trying to attack them and gaining tons of ground. So while they're trying to defend their positions, it's kind of hard to do that when you have FPV drones that are very precisely attacking different positions in your stronghold. So this one we see quite often, both in the Ukrainian conflict, we see Ukrainians and the Russians utilizing this. The Russians obviously have a very high amount of artillery firepower they can also add in conjunction with this type of attack, so it becomes more of a coordinated attack, but it is something that we see very commonly. Now, here's another attack that we very commonly see, especially in different conflicts, but we have our FPV drone pilot as per usual, and he has his FPV drone that is searching for a target. That target is being, obviously just like the other ones, being coordinated and guided to his intended target by that recon drone. So this is where we end up seeing kind of that combination style attack. The difference is once the FPV drone goes and strikes this target here, most of the time, if it's an infantry fighting vehicle or an armored vehicle, the FPV drone will disable that vehicle. And then you'll have obviously your infantry guys that will dismount from that vehicle. And then you'll actually have your recon drone or maybe another drone that is working in conjunction that is able to drop munitions that will go and hunt out the squirters, for lack of a better term, one by one. So very, very deadly, honestly a very hopeless type of attack. This is one that we actually saw kind of in the introduction video where you had the FPV initially strike the group and then you had the recon drone that was going and dropping munitions on individual targets. And so depending on how many recon drones or how fast they can refill them, they could really do a heavy damage on this enemy element here. We're also seeing now we have recon drones that also have the ability to drop multiple munitions and can carry multiple munitions, and so they can attack many different targets all in one flight. So sometimes you'll see this where you'll have a recon drone with drop munitions and then another recon drone that's also helping guide the general team about where the different target sets have egressed from that attack location. So really, really deadly attack. This is the combination strike and is one that we've commonly see very often in conflicts in Europe. Hopefully you guys are still enjoying this video, but I wanted to give a shout out to another sponsor of the channel, and there's so much information, but I think it's all important and you guys need to have that information and it should be available to you guys to be able to watch for free. A company that really cares about the channel and really cares about what we put out is obviously not a stranger, but that's Renewal Rain. Right now, obviously with the Maha movement, especially what's going on in DC with RFK Jr., really pushing for a change in our society to make things a lot healthier. I think it's not only important for us to be conscious of our bodies and what we're putting into our bodies, the fuel and the hydration that we're putting in there, but also the companies that have a high moral standard, just like Renewal Rain. They have here on the back of their can, this is the Psalm Squeeze, Ephesians 4:22 through 24, and it says, "You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." This is just a really cool company. Like, as you guys know, on the Barrel and Hatchet channel, I only like to push things that I stand behind and I think that makes sense for the brand, and Renewal Rain is one of those types of companies. Obviously, there's a lot of other companies out there that are pushing their type of agenda, even if they are healthy, but they have just maybe more values that don't line up with some of ours on the channel. So it's cool to have a company that cares about that wants to give people another option. You can also use points. So as you buy more Renewal Rain and you drink those, you can actually accrue points and save some money, as well as get some free shipments of Renewal Rain. So special thanks to Renewal Rain. Guys, go check them out. The description's in the bottom of this video below. Also, there's a discount code, so make sure you use that to save some money. But special thanks to Renewal Rain. Thank you so much for providing a healthy option giving the example of having that moral high ground as a company. So special thanks to you guys. Go check out Renewal Rain. Now I want to go into the interview that I did with Ascend ISR and QUADTAC Systems and kind of pick their brain and let you join in on the conversation regarding this topic. So guys, thanks for attending this quick video session that we have, and I wanted to open up the conversation between QUADTAC Systems and Ascend ISR, and I really appreciate your guys' expertise on this topic, which I think is a very important topic to be talking about, especially in the scope of where society's heading, whether it's on a social side or economic side, but also on the more specific topic of the warfare / combat type side of where drones are taking us. So QUADTAC, Ascend, welcome. And QUADTAC, if you could give us a quick rundown on who you are and what you guys bring to the table.
Hey, thanks for having us. I just want to point out that I would by no means consider myself an expert in any of this. The whole drone thing has been fairly recent in terms of how it's come about, and we're learning stuff just as much as everybody else. That being said, we've got myself, I have about 4 years in a SWAT environment, and then a lot of that's specialty units for breaching and ISR stuff or SUAS stuff, and then about 7 years in law enforcement. I'm one of the owners of QUADTAC Systems, so we basically came out of a need for helmet-mounted FPV goggles. That was really kind of what kickstarted the company. And we're looking at creating different solutions to kind of integrate specifically FPV drone stuff into military and law enforcement operations. All of our stuff's available to the civilian side as well. And we have some interesting stuff in store on that front.
Awesome, thanks. And Ascend, if you could give a quick rundown on yourself, sir.
Yeah, so my name's Eric. I am one of the co-owners of Ascend ISR Systems. I worked in the aerospace sector of the defense industry as a design engineer. Specifically, I used to work in the Space and Air Systems division of L3 Harris. A few projects that we were on was the Skywarden program, which is a manned ISR aircraft, a light strike aircraft, and was part of a few projects in the realm of unmanned air systems. Basically, the way Ascend started was while I was at L3, I was fortunate enough to develop some friendships with some guys in the Army Special Warfare community. They had a few special requisitions type asks, and that ultimately kickstarted what would later become Ascend ISR Systems. We specialize mostly in multispectral aerial camouflage right now. We're releasing a few products coming out in payload delivery systems, as well as some electronic optics countermeasures.
What I wanted to kind of bring you guys together on is I don't foresee any of us being quote unquote experts in this, because like you said, it's so new and such a developing thing that honestly, with only in the past 2 to 3 years, we're really seeing the massive usage of these FPV or quadcopter style drones. It's such a brand new concept. The concept of ISR or unmanned, aerial reconnaissance is not new, but in the form of these smaller, individual unit sized drones that they, a person could just throw up on their own with a 2-man team or by themselves. That is a new concept, and the roles that are being developed around that type of system. In my opinion, like MQ-9, or you even have manned systems like the MC-12 on the Air Force side, the Reaper program. Like you have all of these, unmanned ISR systems that have existed for a long period of time that provided the capability that now you have individual small units, like a squad has the same capability almost in terms of payload delivery, reconnaissance, FLIR. Like it's mind-blowing to see the capability at the fingertips of the smaller individual warfighter. So what I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about is specifically those types of systems in which you guys kind of work in that space. But what size drone team, if you were to try to establish a drone team as an enabler unit that would be attached to a force, or an enabler special team that's attached to a typical SWAT team, what size do you think would be good for that? 2, 3, 4, 1? What are your guys' thoughts on the pros and cons of those different sizes?
So I think a really good way of looking at this is that I think that drones are an integral part of every modern warfighter's kit. It's not. I really tried to kind of bridge away from I guess a specific element of a fire team, right? Having access to drones. It should really be, in my opinion, every single guy. But as far as what I think has been the most effective use of drones is that they punch really well above their weight class. You have a $4,000 or $5,000 system when you factor in explosives or even thermal units, right? And these things could either directly take on a armored vehicle or call in close air support on an entire array of heavy infrastructure worth millions of dollars. I think that when we're looking at this from a historic perspective, we looked at, like, in terms of modern warfare, modern combat doctrine, it's really revolved around the concept of combined arms warfare, right? Ground troops, armor, artillery, and the cohesive fusion of all of those together. But the reality is that an infantryman can call in their own air support, not in minutes, not in hours, immediately. And with drones, I think that every single warfighter, every single infantryman needs to think of themselves not just as a shooter, but as a detect and strike asset. So a rifleman today should be carrying multiple drones. Like, think of it as carrying different types of grenades and being decentralized in that, that mindset, having everyone have their own individual, drone systems, their own sets of FPV goggles, their own individual access to a controller. I think that's essential. If we're talking strictly small unit, you can have one guy be a swarm lord, for example, and you can have every element of his fire team. You have 10 guys. 9 of those guys are carrying 1 to 2 FPV drones each. You distribute $18,000 worth of binary or plastic explosive amongst that entire team, and you get those things airborne. You have one guy with a camera drone call out specific geogrid locations for assets, and then you have the FPV operators start swarming those ground assets and destroying them. And what you effectively get with that is is the equivalent of like a Predator missile or an MQ-9 Reaper. It's just a lot more portable and a lot cheaper. So I would probably look at it that way.
So I agree with that, Eric. I think you nailed it. I want to touch on just kind of some kind of points to add on to that, and then talk about the application that we see stateside, kind of branching off of like the military side of it. I think you're spot on in terms of like small teams ideally having everyone equipped with that option. I think realistically, it's almost like you have like your machine gunner, and then there's some specialty in those small teams, and having a drone guy or two integrated into that team is crucial. I think that in terms of like, we talk about drones as if they're just like this one big thing, which in some ways they are, but I kind of want to split it up a little bit into roles of like ISR versus FPV to some extent, because we get a lot of questions about that, and there's really some differences, specifically when you're asking about like how many people do you need to run a system. The ISR stuff is often you have someone that's dedicated to that, and they're running a larger drone. It's more of a, it's got a reconnaissance aspect to it, and there's some overlap between ISR and FPV, but it's almost like the comparison to make would be like a precision rifle and a handgun. They're both guns and they both shoot, but you're not doing the same things with them. So that being said, in terms of like FPV, which is what I'm going to speak to, in like a civilian and a law enforcement side, to answer your questions of like how many dudes you should have, you can run it with one. I've seen that where like you have a pilot that can take a knee somewhere and then fly, and they can utilize a smaller drone, an FPV drone in this case, in an effort to check an area up ahead prior to a team moving up to that, or check an objective, or even strike an objective. But ideally, and this is what you kind of see in law enforcement laws, you have 2 to 3 dudes. And generally, that would be run with a pilot that's flying, and then a cover guy that's covering the pilot, and then an observer. And your observer in that small team is running comms, so he's on the radio because the pilot's flying and usually can't hit a push to talk, depending on the type of drone they're flying. And then the observer would have a secondary screen and is looking at a feed from the drone, and is essentially looking for specific things, right? Like in a law enforcement setting, you might be looking for evidence, you might be looking for a suspect. In a civilian setting, you might be in a search and rescue environment where you're looking for debris or victims or something like that. And your pilot is really focused on flight paths, while your observer is looking for specific things and kind of directing the pilot and then giving feedback to the rest of the team, or your TL or your commander, however your structure is set up. And then ideally you have one cover guy. So I'd say ideal would be 3 dudes in that setting. Again, if you're striking and you're in a military application, that can look a little bit different in terms of how many dudes you have. In terms of like running ISR stuff, just 1 dude is fine. Most of the times you're far enough back to where you're really not super worried about like a cover situation, and you're high above and you're doing some recon.
So I think that I kind of agree with both of you guys, and the reason why I say that is, Eric, I can see what you're saying in terms of every rifleman should have a drone, almost like everybody should have like some form of glass, like binoculars or something of that nature. It's just, I'm increasing my situational awareness. I'm looking further ahead. I'm increasing the scope of what I can see, so that way I can kind of make a tactical decision on the battlefield as an individual or with my smaller group. And so having those smaller drones like a DJI Mavic or something that is purchased maybe on their own, or a unit purchase or an individual purchase, or maybe a civilian team, they buy them and they have them for, their own purpose in terms of increasing their SA. But also, on top of that, in terms of a more integrated, larger scale fight, is where I see the enabler drone team, where that's their specialty, similar to a sniper team, kind of like what you both were talking about, was the construct of that enabler team that brings a larger effect on the battlefield, or a larger effect to the operation, because they bring more assets that are more integrated into the larger scheme of maneuver. And so what I see as one of the challenges is, if you have a lot of, every team has its own little drone operator, you end up having deconfliction issues. It's the same type of thing we saw in the military, where, when the Reapers were coming, where we had these smaller handheld, throw propeller prop drones that were like airplanes, and every unit wanted to have one. Well, then you ended up having these little Pumas flying around that were going into airspace or busting airspace issues. So there's deconfliction issues, and one unit wasn't talking to another, and all of a sudden, you hear like, whose drone is this flying in my airspace? And now I was about to have a strike, and now I can't, because I don't want to damage this other unit's drone that we don't even know whose it is. So you have these enabler teams that are able to coordinate to a higher echelon element and provide a better synchronization on the battlefield or in the operation. And so it's essentially a POC that can be contacted if airspace deconfliction needs to happen, or a major scale operation needs to occur, like a swarm or support of a large maneuver. That type of thing is where I see the enabler side of this drone concept coming into play, which I feel like we're already seeing a mesh of this in Europe, where you have guys on the battlefield in the trenches that may have their own Mavics that got sent to them by family members, but then you have drone teams that are enablers that are attached to units on the battlefield to support large-scale operations, or to conduct, their own type of isolated mission sets, whether that's hunting or setting up ambushes or something of that nature. Just like you would see a sniper team, they can be set out on a solo mission task by a higher echelon, or they can be integrated with a couple of different units for a large-scale maneuver. That's where I'm trying to get people to start thinking about. It's like, stop thinking about this one-year mindset of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna need MREs in my basement. to thinking about how as a community can we start having these conversations and then planning for it, obviously with the hopes that it remains a LARP, and we pray that it remains a LARP forever, but having the concept at least on paper, so that way if needs to be exercised, on the worst day of our lives, at least you have the game plan. And so I think this is going to apply on all fields, whether law enforcement application, the military application, or the prepared citizen application, just with obviously individual differences that are differences a little bit more minute, but generally similar.
I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly. I think that in terms of the utilization of drones or any technology on that front is, if you're thinking about it from that perspective or from the perspective of a prepared citizen, is how can I put this tool into danger areas in order to avoid putting myself or other people into those areas. I think that's like one of the biggest, if you want to break it down to like a simple concept, like that's it. That's kind of what it comes down to. Like, we have technology, how do we utilize this in order to keep ourselves and others safe? I mean, that could be anything, right? That could be some sort of a hazardous environment in nature that you need to, utilize a drone for in order to keep yourself safe. That could be, clearing structures. It could be something that, is more of a military operation. But I think that's what it comes down to, whether it's an ISR role or an FPU role.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think another element that makes drones especially appealing to both civilians, law enforcement, military, is I think how cost effective they are. When we're looking at different systems, right? Like, for example, a rifle system or a night vision system. A solid night vision setup, right? Helmet, nods, whether it's a single tube or a dual tube, or if you're rocking GPNVGs like a cool kid, it's going to cost base roughly $5,000 to $6,000 when you factor in ear pro, counterweights, quality of life enhancements. And I think with drones, you can get a similar in terms of application for a lot less, or it could be a lot more effective for a lot less. So thermal ISR drone, for example, solid, convenient parallel for night vision, but you can have a really high-end thermal drone that can detect a human or a target about 1.5 miles away, retail for about $5,500, and that comes with batteries. Whereas, again, with a night vision system, you're getting a 40-degree field of view, give or take, for around, I think, about $500 more than that, when you factor in, again, the helmet and quality life systems for it. So I think drones certainly do have a place for everyone. But in terms of just that raw example, I think the cost analysis there is pretty abundant.
I think as far as, from a thermal perspective, we're seeing a lot more people getting into thermal equipment in general, whether that's handheld stuff or scopes. How much of a necessity is it for a group that maybe trains together, or maybe a law enforcement organization, to have a thermal drone? Like, what's the necessity over just having like a standard video drone?
High.
Yeah.
I would say it's very high in terms of the usefulness of the drone. I can tell you from like a law enforcement perspective, that thermal drone that like our agency has, that some of our surrounding agencies have, they get exercised a lot. Like, I would say on a weekly, daily basis, depending on how busy your area is, for search and rescue operations, lost dogs, missing kids, ranging from that all the way over to tactical operations where you have suspects or people that you're looking for. But if you don't have that thermal, I would say if you have like a training group, if you can get a thermal unit on a drone, you like Eric was saying, you can get into them for like $5,500. It's if you look for them used, on Facebook Marketplace, you can find them for even less than that. If you want something that's all weather rated, you have to step up to something that's closer to like that $7,000 to $10,000 price range, and then that gets you something that is going to fly in pretty much all weather conditions that a drone could reasonably fly in. So like, you're going to be all right in rainy conditions, so long as the wind's not too crazy. But in terms of having thermal, I mean, like, in general, that's thermal systems are becoming more popular because you're not emitting as much, right? And that's a concern, is like, what levels of energy am I putting out when it comes to my systems, and how does that affect possible detection? I think that's one of the big reasons you're seeing a ton of thermal optics. In terms of having them on drones, it 1,000% increases the utility and usefulness of that drone, even in daytime operations. I think the only real benefit to a non-thermal drone or a smaller drone would be, if you have a small drone that you're exercising in a small team environment, specifically when it comes to CQB or checking out small areas up ahead that, you need a small package to get into. Other than that, run a slightly larger. The DJI example would be like a 3T or the newer 4T.
So in terms of these other drone system, obviously the most common one is DJI, and I feel like a lot of people kind of go towards that, like myself, and it's just like, oh, it's a known brand that I'm pretty comfortable with. From what I understand, a lot of the other brands, what separates them, obviously besides capability, because they're all relatively the same in terms of what they can do, is the software. So, is the software at a very user end friendly or user friendly type of place like DJI, if we went with some other type of brand for a thermal drone?
I'll let Eric touch on this in a minute because he's done a bunch more with the software. My 2 cents would be that DJI is similar to like your Apple in the drone world. All of their ecosystems work nicely together. Their software I say this with a hint of sadness in my voice because they are a Chinese company, and I wish that we had an American company that was competing directly with them. In my opinion, we don't currently. I hope that we're on the way there, but their software is some of the best out there. It's very easy to use. You can make some art, and we see a ton of usage when it comes to DJI stuff on the law enforcement side. You see a ton of it on the agricultural side. If you look at South America, I mean, they're running those like ag drones like crazy down there. It's just, they're easy to use. You need cops to be able to learn how to use them. So like that's a big part of it. Just like for a military application, the ease of use is huge for a soldier or someone that, is going to be the end user of that product. So I think, there's some ways around it that we've actually seen more use of DJI, within the military, whether it's for training or other things, than I would have expected initially when we started. But in terms of law enforcement, the point I was going to make is you kind of have to consider, like, yeah, it's a Chinese company, is your data at risk? Is your GPS data getting sent back? Possibly. There's some workarounds to that. There's some stuff you can do to limit that. At the end of the day, is it a concern for you? And that's kind of the question you have to answer. And there's plenty of agencies that aren't concerned about it. There's some that are. And obviously on the Fed side, that's more of a concern.
So you're saying that DJI is the hollow sun of the drone world?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
And we don't have a competitor. I mean, we do, but we don't, stateside.
Right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Felix said. 100%. DJI is like the Apple of drones, and it's the UI, really friendly UI. A lot of people don't really pay much attention to that or don't attribute it to having a substantial impact on like the end user, but very clean UI, very simple to navigate the drones, pilot them, extract data from them, and so on. It's truly, they truly have a really great UI, great software. Also, again, Felix touched on this, but it's they have a very friendly pilot. They're very robust in terms of, I guess, accessibility. Like, it's robust accessibility. The fit and finish of them is nice, but I would say it's really it's little quality of life enhancements compared to a off-the-shelf or a do-it-yourself drone. Every guy that's built their drone knows what a Pixhawk test is, right? They know, they've 100% had to calibrate their drones, play around with IMU, had some GPS issues, magnetic compass interference. Like, these are things that DJI has really tackled into their drones, like has tackled into their software, which makes diagnosing and remedying these issues in the field very, very expedient for the end user. On top of it, and another thing, DJI doesn't really have any competitors in terms of fit and finish, right? We're talking about a drone that's fully encased in a polymer, shell. And a lot of drones, surprisingly, in the United States really don't have that, and they can't they can't really even, I guess, compete in architecture in just in general. It's very difficult for U.S. manufacturers to emulate, I guess, the manufacturing capabilities and finished product quality that China has. Not saying it's a superior quality to U.S. products at all. I would love, for example, if Skydio released some of their systems to civilian consumers, but it's I guess, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. We don't really have a company here in the U.S. that can access and really bring to market a solid drone that combines the ease of use and ease of access that DJI has with their software. And I think that's a really, really important part of this equation when we look at DJI versus even Autel, which is another Chinese company, but it's very apparent.
So where do you see like a stepping stone? Because I want to talk about, Eric, have you hit on this real quick about the standard quadcopter with the thermal capability? And then Felix, I'm going to be pushing to you over for the FPV side of things. But like, where then is, if, just like with guns, like, all right, what do I get for my first gun? And what's a good beginner entry level type of rifle to get into to kind of start figuring things out? And then where do I go from there once I increase my skill set and I'm able to maybe go a little bit further than just the Apple type of drone capability?
I would say it's kind of like starting off with a rifle. You buy a lot of mags for it. That's at least the mentality that I had when I got into my rifle. I said, if you get one carbine, it's 10 mags, get a bunch of ammo for it, train on it. And for drones, it's get a bunch of batteries and get some flight time in. That's something that I would say right off the rip. Make sure you have access to like core components and parts that you would need, to fix your drone or replace. So like props, batteries, a cool carrying case, stuff that just allows you to get out there and practice with it. When you're getting more into kind of like the tactical realm of things, it really becomes a matter of how do I integrate this system into my kit? And that depends entirely on what type of drone you're using, what type of applications you're getting into. Do I want to do, more ISR work? Do I want to do reconnaissance, infiltration, forward observing, right? I would then say, not to plug my own products here, but probably get a morsel. If you're doing something that's more direct action, right? If you're going into a structure and you're dealing with quasi-barricaded subjects, if you're utilizing FPV drones in a tactical capacity, I would say 100% get a mount like the QUADTAC Systems G2. It's really dependent on your application as to what accessories you should pursue getting. But I think for every single drone, like first-time buyer of the system, make sure you stock up on batteries. Make sure you actually pilot your drone, and make sure it just doesn't collect dust. that's probably the best piece of advice that I would have. Following that, when you get into more advanced units, thermal units are fun. Really getting into FPV, building out your own FPV drone, that's awesome too. Find a way that you can utilize your drone in a way that I guess not just fills a need with your, I guess like your defense and self-preservation type applications, but also something that allows you to enjoy it as a hobbyist and an enthusiast, because they are, honestly, at the end of the day, it's kind of like your guns. It's fun to go out in the range, it's fun to train. So have fun with your drones.
As far as the, let's just say I get a Mavic or what you were talking about, and I want to upgrade the camera's capability to maybe have the capability to zoom in. Are there different attachments that DJI offers that I can add to upgrade my drone, or is it pretty much I just need to get a whole new drone system?
So it's more or less, if you're talking about like entry-level drones, so like your minis, your Avadas, you're more likely than not going to have to buy a newer drone. They don't have swappable payload systems. Now, when you're dealing with larger drones, more expensive enterprise models like the M300, the M600, they do have swappable payloads. But again, we're talking about cameras that are in the tens of thousands of dollars. Some of them are obviously like $5,000 or $6,000, but it's more than likely to have the ability to swap payloads in a sense of a pure like camera, or what your actual like, your secondary. If you have a thermal unit, we play around with thermal units sometimes. We piggyback them on FPV drones. We're playing around with that concept right now.
Very interesting.
It's more than likely than not, you're going to have to buy another drone. And that's, again, what really sucks about having, I guess, a company with just complete domination of the market right now. It's good and bad. It's a double-edged sword, obviously, but I would say if you have an unlimited budget, and you have a larger, Matrice series drone, you'll probably be fine with swapping out a payload.
I think it's one of those things where also it's a mindset change, because you say like, oh, it's only like a lens might be $5,000 or $6,000. In terms of perspective of, applying that to guns, like we do that all the time. It's like, hey, I'm going to buy nods, or I'm going to buy this thermal scope for $4,000, or, you get the analogies. And so what I'm trying to get at is like, if we see this capability as important, I guess shifting the mindset of like, okay, the cost really isn't that drastic in comparison to things that I'm already buying within this realm of preparedness. And so if you were to, let's just say, get a drone that has a payload capability, would you recommend that your first payload upgrade would be thermal over a better optical camera?
100% thermal. Yeah. It goes back to like the concept of identification precedes interdiction. If you're going to utilize that drone at night, more than likely you are, just because, again, if we ever, just historically, even modern combat, most stuff goes down at night. And having the ability to engage threats during the day and at night is critical.
Yeah, any drone that you buy that's worth its salt. So like, let's say a slightly older model now would be like a 3T, so T being the thermal version or the enterprise version. That drone, you can get into for $5,000 to $7,000. It has a thermal sensor on it, and it has an optical zoom sensor on it. I think it's like 36 times or something like that. Any drone that you buy from DJI that has a thermal sensor on it is going to have a optical zoom capability that is more than what you need, most likely. The digital zoom on these things is pretty amazing. The stability is pretty amazing on those gimbals. I've been in situations with, so to piggyback off Eric's answer in terms of like a drone, like he mentioned, it's mission specific, and I 100% agree with that. If you're looking at like, you have a large training group that you guys are training with on a regular basis, and you want to buy like a 30T, and it's a vehicle-based drone, right? It's in a big case, like you're not carrying that thing around. That's an option. The other option is like a 3T, what I was just mentioning, just as an example here. Like that thing fits in a backpack, and I've used those on a number of times where, the thing is the size of my laptop, a little bit larger when it's in the air, and like I've seen mice under mice thermal signatures on deployments that we had investigated as if they were people, you know, and didn't realize what the scale was essentially at the end of the day. Like the thermal sensors on those things are insane.
As far as the ISR capability, you know, we have these quadcopters that are able to get really, really high. What is the purpose outside of, like, you know what I'm saying? Because I think one of the things that we had as a disadvantage on deployments was the fact that we had drones that could be heard from a long distance away. We called them flying lawnmowers. So you usually kind of would give away or burn your target because they would hear the presence of that aircraft. So with some of those larger drone systems, is there any noise mitigation capability, or is it essentially just get as high and as far away as you possibly can and have a really good camera?
You can do some stuff with like different props, like more blades on the props generally make them a little quieter, but you're not going to get over that. I mean, they're electric. They don't have a two-stroke on them or anything like that. Like there's some systems out there that have motors, and they sound just like that, like a lawnmower flying above you. I would say just high and far.
So as far as kind of Felix kind of switching gears here, the other role that we see quite a bit when it comes to drones is the FPV, or the first person view. Can you give us a quick rundown on the capability that FPV provides and the general mission set that it usually goes into?
Sure. So this is a serious rabbit hole. So if I start to go off one direction, you're gonna have to kind of bring me back. This is a Legos for adults kind of thing, and if you're into guns, there's a high probability you're gonna find some of this interesting as you start to delve into it. FPV stuff, it's first person viewed, right? So you're flying through a set of goggles, and what that allows for is basically full immersion. And it allows the drone to be piloted very differently than like an ISR platform where you're looking at a screen. So there's a ton of different FPV systems out there, but it basically breaks down into two categories where you have your digital systems and then you have your analog systems. Your digital systems are things like your DJIs. And what I mean by digital is just the transmission system and the operation of the drone and how it connects to your controller and your goggles is digital. In DJI's case, it's Wi-Fi band, right? Versus analog, which can operate off of a ton of different frequencies in terms of how the signal is transmitted. So digital has the benefits of, you know, you're basically looking at a 1080p picture, so a ton of detail. Downsides would be it's fairly easy to jam. If you have a Wi-Fi jammer, the thing's toast. And then once you lose connection, you're not going to be able to regain it. But it's popular in law enforcement, popular in civilian worlds, just because 1080p or even recording in 4K in some cases, like it's high quality video. That's huge. If you're in law enforcement, detail matters, right? Is that guy holding a phone or does he have a gun? That's a big difference. And having 1080p is huge. Signal into buildings is pretty good on those, especially the DJIs. We've had pretty good luck with them, like signal penetration into structures. And then on the analog side, that's where you're seeing your military applications. I'm sure you've seen the videos out of the Ukraine. The footage can look kind of fuzzy sometimes. The image looks a little like grainy. That's all analog. The benefit to analog is it's easier to repeat. It's easier to do some stuff in terms of reducing the likelihood of jamming or signal frequency hopping is what I'm looking for. So the range is extended, but the image is not as clear, right? So that's one of the cons. The FPV side of it in general, so if you were going to get started into it, kind of to answer that question based on what Eric mentioned earlier, like DJI is a good place to start. They have their Avadas. That's an FPV drone. The use case for those is going to be small areas that you want to search, like structures, or even, you know, you're not going to have a ton of optical zoom on those. You're generally not going to have thermal on them. So you're really you're limited to a small drone that you can deploy forward of whatever position you're in. The Avadas are a great place to start. They're super automated. They have a bunch of systems that stop you from crashing them. So you can, you know, if you let go of the sticks on the controller, the things are just going to sit there. It's not going to drift off and hit something. contrary to that is what you're seeing in the Ukraine or in other environments where FPVs are being flown fully manual in either angle or acro mode. That's significantly more difficult. I would say, depending on the person, that's like 10, maybe 2 to 10 hours of time on a simulator on a computer prior to you being able to pilot one of those without immediately crashing the thing. And the benefit there is precision, right? So if you have someone that's good at flying those, they can make super quick turns. They're super fast. They're almost impossible to shoot out of the air, and they can be super precise with what they're doing with it, whether they're searching structures or whether they're striking targets. You're essentially packing, you know, like Eric mentioned, some sort of explosive onto that, and then you have a $400, you know, cruise missile that you're using to defeat a helicopter or whatever you're going after. In terms of, you go ahead.
Well, I think to put in perspective, one of the statistics I was seeing is that on average, those FPV drones being used by both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, are traveling at about 90 kilometers an hour. And when I went skeet shooting to kind of like prep in terms of just train in terms of like shotgun training for drone, the closest thing you can get to it besides trying to shoot one of those down, like those skeet are going so flippin' slow, and it's still a challenge. So imagine trying to shoot something that's going 90 kilometers an hour that can also change directions on a dime. It's insane.
The joke that I've made to people in terms of that on this, you know, when you can certainly shoot them out of the air, like it has happened, and I'm sure it will continue to happen. Unfortunately, you're probably going to get hit by the second or third one that you're not seeing coming. If you go and you skeet shoot, and instead of shooting the way that you're used to, you go stand 50 feet in front of the launcher and try to shoot the thing out of the air as it's coming towards you, that's pretty accurate as to what you're going to be dealing with.
Wow.
And that's obviously a little bit more difficult. In terms of, just because I want to touch on this real quick, in terms of like, say you start with a DJI product, like an Avata, you can turn that into, once you get good with that, they let you kind of take some of the bumpers off and fly that in a less restricted mode. And then if you say, hey, I want to, you know, download a simulator to my computer, my DJI controller will plug right into that. I can practice flying and I'm getting good, and I want to move over to like an analog system, or I'm sorry, not an analog system, but a manual FPV system. What you can do is you can buy different drones, like we use Synolog 35s made by GEP-RC. And you can get those with a DJI Air unit. So basically the DJI camera, the DJI flight controller, and then the DJI antenna inside of a non-DJI drone. And then that will play nicely with your DJI goggles and your DJI controller. And you can program that with a program called Betaflight on your computer. You can make the drone do whatever you want to do. It doesn't have to have a GPS on it. You can fly it whenever, wherever. And you're basically using DJI products, but you're no longer in that DJI, you know, safety umbrella of like needing remote ID in order to take off or needing a GPS, and it's fully manual. So that kind of opens the door, and then you go down the rabbit hole of, FPV drones.
So, I mean, as far as like even in a law enforcement application, with what you're able to disclose, like what do you guys use FPV specifically for over like a standard ISR platform that's high and dry in this with the thermal unit?
So without going into it, I'll go into some specifics because this is common knowledge to an extent. You can hop on YouTube and you can watch tons of body cam footage from different SWAT callouts or police operations. So they're almost always both used. So your ISR drone is up overhead. It's usually ran from someone that's away from the scene or at a command post, and it's giving an overhead image, usually with thermal, of like the whole problem. So whatever you're dealing with, you have overhead. You can track just like you can with a helicopter. You can zoom just like you can. It's basically a helicopter that's just sitting above and giving you a top-down view of whatever you're dealing with. FPV drones are deployed by patrol officers or by SWAT operators on calls that are dangerous in order to clear certain areas or locate suspects, and basically to avoid putting dudes in dangerous areas if they don't need to. So if you don't have exigent circumstances in a situation, like you don't have a hostage or you don't have something that needs to be dealt with immediately, let's just say for example's sake, you have a bad guy that's in a house and he's committed some crime, you need to go arrest him, but he won't come out. You don't just want to go into that house because you're now in a dangerous environment, right? Like that guy could be hiding, that guy could be looking to ambush you, depending on what you're looking for him for. So that's kind of the step that FPV drones would be utilized in, along with other robotics technology, is you're pushing those assets into a structure or an area in an attempt to locate somebody. We see them being used on the patrol side as well now, specifically out west in California. I've talked to a couple different agencies out there that are big into it, where they're deploying them in patrol cruisers, just like they would a less lethal shotgun or a 40 mil less lethal launcher, that maybe, you know, every 5th or 6th cruiser in an agency has one, and they can be called upon as a resource for, let's say, patrols dealing with some sort of active burglary, where they have a large store that's been, you know, broken into, and they want to push a drone into that prior to putting officers into that to see if there's anybody left inside in terms of suspects that might be hiding or waiting. Or even like a vehicle barricade where you have a high risk stop, someone that's committed some sort of violent crime and is now in their car, and maybe they've been spiked in a pursuit. Instead of just walking officers up to that car, if someone's not compliant, you can get eyes on that with an FPV drone very quickly, and it gives you more information. So, you know, the further back you are off of something, whether that's in a civilian world or in the law enforcement world, the more time you have to react to whatever happens. So having distance and then eyes on, that's your 2 biggest things.
So as far as the, you know, Felix, I want you to kind of hit on this specifically. You kind of did a little bit, and then Eric, I'm going to shift it over to you. But specifically in the FPV world, what are some of the weaknesses that are being exploited, that are trying to be circumnavigated or at least strengthened when it comes to FPV?
When you say weaknesses, what specifically do you mean?
So, for example, like vulnerabilities to it, where areas where maybe the technology's like not there yet, like you were talking about with visibility in structures when it comes to radio control versus like a fiber optic cable. So you're still essentially having a drone hooked to a string and flown in there. You know, so those are some workarounds that we're seeing like in Europe to be able to maintain video clarity. But what are some of the weaknesses that we see with FPV in terms of the capability that might be a limitation?
That's a big one in terms of like electronic warfare. I won't get too far into that, but basically the workaround there is, you know, you're essentially creating a tow missile by having a drone that's got some sort of cable attached to it. The fly-by-wire stuff for the I can't think of the name. The cable stuff. So if you have a drone that's got a fiber optic cable attached to it, those cables, depending on the size of the spool and the size of the drone, you know, you're looking at 10 to 15 kilometers of distance, of range out of those. And that's not jammable. It's not stoppable in any way. And so one of the things that we're seeing now is they're utilizing those to take out, you know, counter EW devices, and then they can fly whatever else they want. In terms of limitations, you're constantly fighting weight in terms of the size of the battery you strap on there. So you're trying to get basically max flight time. Average flight time on small FPV drones is like 8 to 15 minutes, depending on the drone. And you're basically fighting that, like, I could put a big battery on this, but then the drone's going to be really heavy and it's going to use up more juice to stay in the air. Or I could put a smaller battery in it, it'll be lighter, but I'm going to have less battery. So it all depends on how you fly and what you're doing with it. I'd say battery is a problem, and then range restrictions. So like, at what point do I lose a signal? I've flown some of the digital systems 2 stories up in a large steel and concrete structure out of an armored vehicle with no issues. So, you know, they punch decently far. One of the problems with digital systems like the DJIs is that once you lose connections, it's gone and it's not going to reestablish, versus an analog system where, say, you dip over a valley and you lose some visual in your goggles. If you power up, you know, there's a likelihood that that's going to regain itself and you'll be able to get a feedback on an analog system.
Because, I mean, all of it essentially still goes back to line of sight, correct?
No,
a lot of.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
no.
there is some sort of frequency hopping capability with some of these.
Yeah, you have pretty good connection in term, especially with the digital stuff. Like, you don't have to be directly line of sight to the thing. They have pretty good range.
Yeah, and frequency hopping also is sorry to cut in
No,
here.
go ahead.
Hopping is really dependent upon a lot of like back end programming and software that you have access to. A commercial drone, for example, like DJI's, the Avata series, they don't come with any ability to frequency hop, right? They don't operate within a set of predetermined military bands that may come, for example, as a feature on some of the newer Parrot offerings. However, you can press any type of drone into frequency hopping or having frequency hopping capabilities if you kind of understand the back end of AVI and invest in some of the invest some time into collecting knowledge and some of those resources out there.
So kind of going back to the FPVs with the fiber optic cable, are those retrievable? Like, can they fly those back if they don't find a target? And if so, like, is that cable just gone? I mean, if you got 15 kilometers worth of cable just spread out over topography, like, how does that come back?
It's a one-time use thing for the most part. You're not reconnecting that. That's actually an interesting question, because I asked someone that not recently, about a year ago, and they were kind of confused at my question. In terms of, I basically asked, like, what do you do when you don't find a target and you don't strike something? And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, like, how do you get the drone back? And he basically went on to say, like, you don't, because it's got a warhead on it and it's basically set to go once they leave. So, like, they're gonna fly that until the battery runs out, crash it, or they're gonna strike something, but that drone's not coming back.
Yeah, it's a one-way delivery mission, 100%.
Yep.
Interesting.
I thought about that just because, like, that's not how we utilize them, and it's an interesting thought though.
Yeah, that is pretty fascinating. So, kind of switching gears from the FPV to more of the ISR observation and recce style. What are some of the limitations that you see, Eric, in terms of just your standard ISR, whether it's price point or, time of flight, durability, things of that nature?
I would say probably they're very easy to actually hack, especially some of the DJI offerings. If you're running an SD card in your ISR drone, which you probably should, given that you're trying to collect intelligence utilizing it, you're at a higher susceptibility of being actually attacked from from an actual dedicated electronic warfare team. Drone teams like strike teams, recon teams, and electronic warfare teams they go hand in glove with one another. In fact, it's actually not uncommon at all, for example, in Ukraine, for guys that are, drone operators to have serious electronic warfare capabilities, really, really specializing in counter UAS activities. And just a few weeks ago, I actually got a video from some guys I will say a maritime unit in Ukraine, and they were able to intercept a Russian DJI Mavic 3T right after it dropped a bomb on a small team of their guys. So I would say certainly, especially if you're not running, like, again, a frequency hopping system, if you're not running AVI, you're seriously at risk of getting attacked, like having that drone either get hijacked. Or even worse, if you're running like an FPV drone that's utilizing a digital rather than an analog system, you can even have the FPV drone get hacked, and then if it's carrying ammunition system, basically the team that just penetrated your system will have your drone RTB, so it will have it actually go back to the sender.
Wow.
With the explosive ordnance still attached to the drone, and that's not uncommon at all. It happens almost every day in Ukraine, but those are some of the issues with, in my opinion, like the worst right now issue with all drones is just how susceptible they are to a capable electronic warfare team. That's why you have guys running fiber optic cables, because they fundamentally recognize it's not a matter of if, but when the drone's going to get hacked. So they're just trying to mitigate their risk as much as possible by severing any ability whatsoever for a counter electronic warfare team to hijack that drone. So that's why you have fiber optic cable. That's why now you're seeing, spool systems that are 15 kilometers in length. It's because they recognize that, hey, even our ISR aircraft are, this is not going to be something that we just reserve for FPV drones with a short range, right? It doesn't matter. We want this to extend to all of our air systems. So I would say that that's probably number one, especially for intelligence collecting purposes, the biggest risk for a drone operator to face if they're running an ISR aircraft.
You can get around that with some tethered drones. Like some of the ISR drones offer tethering options, but that it's not quite the same as having a fiber optic cable. Usually those tethers aren't like 30 kilometers in length, so you're much more restricted as to. It's more like an observation balloon in the olden days.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the quadcopter ISR platform, I almost see it as a dual role capability because it also has a payload capability that can be dropped without destroying the drone itself, and like an FPV would. So if it was a single, a no return flight for an FPV where it's trying to essentially fly the missile into the target, when it comes to your ISR platform, can you elaborate a little bit more on drop capability, payloads, how to kind of weigh the ratios of what your drone can carry versus what it can't? If you can a little bit, Eric.
Yeah, general rule, your drone, whatever its weight is, it can carry roughly 4 times its body weight. Now that's again a rough rule, but it's capable of doing that. A lot of the DJIs, that's what we've factored into the equation, even with secondary, tertiary attachments like the morsel, for example. It adds a little bit of weight to the drone, not 4 times the actual body weight of the aircraft, but I would say the larger your airframe is, so you're running a 7-inch FPV drone, a 7-inch, ISR-based drone, 9-inch, you can carry, I would say, a lot of 40 millimeter grenade type systems. You can carry M67s, RGDs, basically any and all types of infantry hand grenades. Something, unless it's like an anti-tank grenade. But with that said, you can realistically carry a system that's equivalent to or about equal to a 40 millimeter grenade, like 40 millimeter HE.
So have you guys heard about anything in terms of like the cartel or intel on the open source about what they're using to be able to drop munitions from their quadcopters?
Yeah, they're using so they're DJI, really using DJI Mavics. That's not uncommon at all either in Ukraine. A lot of guys are just running, Mavic-based airframes, 7-inch, 10-inch FPV frames to do that. And by the way, for record, an FPV drone is certainly capable of dropping a grenade or a piece of explosive ordnance. It's just a lot of guys will like using the actual FPV as the guided missile system because of that precision capability, especially in a confined space.
Yeah, I saw some stuff recently with guys. So we've messed around with running servos on the FPV drones. So basically just a small servo off the bottom, and then you can activate that through the remote that you have, whether it's a DJI remote, because you can basically solder that right to the PIDs on the flight controller, and then program those PIDs to activate via Betaflight. But there's a couple dudes that are taking servos and mounting them to the camera, so they can actually activate the camera to pan down on an FPV drone prior to dropping. And then I don't know if you saw some of the other stuff, they're like mounting shotguns and stuff like that, and actually having like reticles that they can use to aim that are overlaid on the screen that they're looking at. In terms of payload, just to touch on that, so on average, like a 10-inch FPV is going to be able to carry about 3 kilos of payload, which is quite a lot. In terms of, that's a question I had for Eric. DJIs, we've run into issues with them not letting you take off depending on what you have on them. At some point, the drone software-wise will block you. Again, that's model specific, and if you're doing FPV stuff, there's really no restriction. So it's if the drone will physically take off, you're good to go.
Yeah, with DJI they can get really finicky with calibration, IMU issues. So some of the larger explosive ordnance, if you're going to try to fly around with a brick of Semtex or C4, you're probably best served utilizing an FPV drone. just trying to really focus on stabilizing that camera, putting in some quality of life enhancements for the actual like camera system and GPS system for the FPVs to make them kind of press them more into that ISR role, but also with having that like, light strike capability as far as a dropping system.
It's almost like DJI doesn't want you to do that.
Yeah, don't want. Yeah, exactly. It's you can get around that obviously if you jailbreak your DJI. Now that kind of comes into territory that is ever changing, especially as DJI releases new models. Jailbreaking your drone, there's resources out there that tackle that directly. We're planning on releasing some articles on that too, very, very soon. So it's that helps, but again, it's more of a kind of a preemptive field remedy for the drone. But as Felix has touched on, an FPV drone, if you're getting a large framed FPV system, can carry a substantial amount of weight. I've seen drones in Ukraine carry 20 to 35 pounds of ordnance on them, just raw explosives. Yeah, it's extremely impressive.
So what are some of the risks in terms of using drones, or are there no risks in when you to have or use a drone? I'm thinking about as far as like signature takeoff and landing, kind of following the bread trail back home to where a pilot could be. What are some of the risks in your guys' mind, if any?
Yeah, so your biggest risk is going to be on takeoff and landing. For conventional kind of commercial drones like the DJIs and Autels, they have a very, very distinct, visible light strobing emission that comes off their wings in the center of their body, and even one that's activated, an IR light that's also activated when you're descending the aircraft at a certain, I think it's like anything 30 feet and under, you're going to have that IR light like automatically turn on. So it's stuff like that that's going to really give away your position. That's where, we were actually contacted by an Army Special Warfare group to make the morsel, or make what would later become the morsel, for exactly that reason, is because of that visible light emission. They were dealing with a lot of insurgents, let's say, at the crossroads of the Eurasian landmass, and that is exactly why why we even got started, was because of that specific request from a requisitions officer.
And so can you talk about that a little bit more, Eric, in terms of so you guys sell a product that helps cover some of those lights up, and what are some other attributes of what you guys provide?
So it's a multispectral thermal mitigation, signature mitigation system. Primarily it focuses on thermal mitigation, a low NIR kind of signature on the entire body of the aircraft, and deleting or blocking out the visible light emissions. It was a work in progress that started, I would say, 2022. We were contacted again by a specific group that was operating in the Middle East, and they were utilizing commercial drones, DJI drones specifically, they were strapping explosives to them and utilizing them to deal with quasi-barricaded and fully barricaded subjects. And initially, they said, "Hey, we're running these DJIs. We're using spray paint. We're using electrical tape to cover up those exposed light modules. Is there anything that you can do to assist with this? Because eventually, spray paint fades. Tape, it's effective, but it frays, and then on top of that, it also throws off the calibration of your drone a little bit. You're gonna suffer from some drag coefficient issues. So overall, from a high level, you're gonna suffer from some maneuverability issues." And they were like, "Hey, can you make a cleaner, more refined solution to manage our visible light emissions?" And that was pretty easy. We actually were able to shoot out a product to them. For them to run in T&E in the field. It just utilized a very, very simple blend of fabrics. We used nylon, mint, a few other special ingredients with that. But when that was successful, we really didn't hear much back from them, other than the fact, "Hey, it works, thank you." But at that time, the Russia-Ukraine war was in full swing, and you had electronic centers like Bakhmut that were setting a really, really, honestly, a chilling precedent for drones. Specifically, you have a fire team that starts off with roughly 10, let's say, Mavics at the beginning of a week. You're going to lose, I would say, anywhere from 6 to 7 of those within a 5-day span to either, small arms fire or just outright dedicated jamming systems. And we were hearing about this from some contacts that were there in country, and we decided to, kind of enhance the system overall and make a full spectrum aerial camouflage system that covers and that countered night fighting equipment. When we're talking about Russian infantry, a lot of guys have the misconception that, hey, the brunt of Russia's infantry forces are comprised out of Wagner conscripts and just again draftees or regular infantry personnel. And those guys have, what we've seen obviously from them is they don't have night vision, they don't have thermals, they're very under equipped. A lot of them are just running basic load bearing equipment with no body armor. But when we're talking about VDV and we're talking about GRU and alpha teams like this, I would say Spetsnaz, to make this very specific. VDV, which is the Russian paratroopers, they're running thermals, they're running night vision, and they're even running, in some cases, they're running fusion systems. These guys are very, very well equipped, and ultimately, when you're dealing with some of the most ferocious fighting, it's going to be taking place at night. So we decided to build out the morsel and kind of fine-tune it for night fighting applications by applying we have a proprietary thermal spray, like a thermal mitigation spray that goes on the exterior. We utilized layering in the system, we utilized layering with 3 different types of fabrics, and ultimately it's been extremely effective for reconnaissance purposes, for really mitigating the loss of these kind of dedicated thermal units, these dedicated, more expensive ISR aircraft in the field. So we've had a lot of really positive feedback from it. But yeah, that's basically the origin story.
I think it's one of those things you brought up, and this is something I've been preaching just based off what I see on open source, is never underestimating your enemy and downplaying their capability, because the VDV, to put it as an equivalent, is like the 82nd Airborne or the 101st. Those units are very capable, and the units that a lot of people just believe all the Russian military is comprised of is your support guys that just happen to be tasked with frontline duty because they're on a ever-changing battlefield. So it's that is not your main fighting force. Those are just the guys that happen to be honestly utilized in a reconnaissance role to be bullet magnets, so that way they could figure out where the positions are at, so the actual troops who do the fighting on a tactical level can actually maneuver and take out the enemy. And so exactly 100%, dude, it's I've seen it so much on the internet of just people underestimating them, and I'm I think that is a massive mistake in any type of wartime scenario. So and so Felix, one of the things I see as a vulnerability, specifically if you're running an FPV style drone, is I have an Avata, and when I'm running the goggles, I'm I have these things strapped to my head and I have zero situational awareness. I usually have to rely on somebody else to kind of let me know what's going on, or if we get into a situation or a gunfight or something, I go from no situational awareness to I have only what my partner's able to tell me, and it's hey, by the way, there's people over here. So that kind of leads me into the product that you guys developed was specifically to assist in that need and solve that problem. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So we ran into your exact problem, right? Operationally in the SWAT world, in terms of dudes that were flying, that were operators, and generally, initially they were flying from a hard cover position, whether you're in some sort of armored vehicle or something like that. And then that moved to, you have large structures, maybe you have a large office building, or you're in a woodland situation, you need to be out in a less protected environment. And now you have goggles that are on straps, you have to pull your helmet off, you lose your comms, you lose your ballistic protection, and you have a ton of time in switching back over to any of those systems. So like you have to take all that off, you have to unplug from your radio, and then you put your goggles on. You fly. Again, you're not hearing what your team is doing. You're not hearing anything other than what the guy right next to you is telling you. And then if you have an emergency and you have to act, you have to either do that without your hearing protection, comms, and helmet, or you have to take the time to put all that stuff on, which you won't. So having the goggles mounted, we mount basically via a Wilcox style mount. There's a couple options obviously out there. Anything with a dovetail will work with our mounts. Our mounts are aluminum. We went down the whole 3D printed route. They are going to break eventually. There's a couple companies now that are doing some stuff with that. We've stress tested them. They've all broken. So we went aluminum just because that's way more sturdy. They're not very heavy. They clamp onto the goggles, and then you can run the goggles. They clamp onto different goggle models in slightly different ways. So some of the analog models obviously look different. But they basically clip right in. You can flip them up just like night vision. You can flip them down like night vision. If you're running like an Avata, you can actually flip them up and the Avata will just sit there. So if you have an emergency, you can, flip them up. Your drone will just do its drone thing for a minute, and you can flip them back down and keep flying. So you kind of have more awareness of what's going on around you. Say you're in a position where maybe you're driving the car for whatever reason and you're parked somewhere, you can flip your goggles up, reverse the car out of a driveway, and then flip it back down and see what your drone's doing. The other thing we did is we installed a hinge on all of our mounts so that you can push the goggles away from your face quickly, and then you can basically peek over the top of them almost like you would with night vision, and then push them back into your face. But the big thing is just having the ability to flip them up out of the way. And honestly, that's what most of our guys do most of the time, is when they're not using them, they're just up on top.
Awesome. Well, what are some final words of wisdom you guys want to leave with the audience in the realm of drones and the ever growing and changing concept of drone teams and what they provide? What are some things that you guys want to kind of leave with the audience?
My 2 cents would basically just be kind of what I started with. Value, the human aspects over the hardware aspects. So look at this from the perspective of how can I utilize this tech in order to keep myself and the people that I care about safe. And then other than that, get out there, get after it, and crash some drones. And that's how you learn.
Yeah, I would say I completely agree with Felix there. Definitely go out, get some practice on your drones. But I would really look at it as a huge shift in terms of combined arms warfare and, just how it's going to redefine the battlefield. When you look throughout history, right, you see certain weapon platforms utterly transform and uproot every single aspect of infantry doctrine of how warfare is fought, whether it's, conventional, asymmetric, or whatever. It's really, we're looking at drones now in the last few years. They're still in infancy, honestly, but what they've accomplished already is pretty massive. They've uprooted the entire flow of infantry combat in terms of how large mechanized armor units are exposing, even, or how willing they are even to bring up their I guess press a position or maneuver on the field. Now infantry is not even just a complementary accessory to these systems. It's literally, you need an entire your entire apparatus, like your entire defense apparatus around your conventional multi-million-dollar infrastructure is being transformed. You're seeing vehicles, every single vehicle in Ukraine now is running, even if it's a shitty technical, right? It's still running a electronic warfare system of some sort, a jamming device of some sort. And I think if we turn back time a little bit, we have to look at conflicts that have kind of caused the entire global community to reassess their small arms capability, their infantry doctrine, right? And I think a lot of guys are looking at Ukraine as a World War I, and I think it's more of a Russo-Japanese war, like a scramble for Africa type situation, right? You have think of it in the sense of the Second Modest War, right? You had like in the 1890s, you had the Modest State, and they had rebelled against the British Empire. There was a battle in 1898, excuse me. It was the Battle of Omdurman, right? You had 50,000 modest warriors, and they charged a British force of around 8,000. It ended up being one of the most one-sided massacres in military history. At the end of the day, you had 11,000 of these modists that were wiped out, and the British suffered fewer than 50 casualties. And the reason, this happened was because the British fielded machine guns. They brought the Maxim gun into the situation. And when you fast forward this to 2022, right, Russia was one of the world's largest militaries they still are, but their armor at the current time of this video being recorded, their armor capabilities and their ground assets have been reduced by roughly 50%. But Russia was expected to wipe out Ukraine in a matter of days, right? Most people believed that would actually be the end result. The Ukrainian forces, though, used drones earlier than the Russians, and they used them in mass, a lot sooner than the Russians. And they used them to turn the tide. They leveraged these small commercial UAVs for reconnaissance. They used them for loitering munitions, for precision strikes. They used FPV drones at low cost as guided weapons, like those fiber optic cables that you're seeing on these FPV drones. Those are tow missiles, right? They're just cheaper. Russia's massive armored formations and traditional artillery, like their heavy artillery doctrine, crumbled against it, right? So I think it's very similar to, the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, the Modest conflict. We're going to have to see, we're basically looking at a new era of warfare and a kind of a inflection point for a lot of militaries to maybe reassess how much emphasis they place in I guess, kind of Cold War systems and I guess more legacy type combined arms systems or force multiplication systems.
I think to other flip side of that coin, Eric, and to your point, is the Russians have now, because of that massive blow to their doctrine and the loss of armor and assets, have taken that lesson and not just ignored it, but literally poured nitro gas on it and just freaking adopted that into their own and developed their own doctrine, and then have flipped that coin on its head to where now they're using so many different drone types and methods and TTPs that it's also massacring the Ukrainian side, which is now taking a lot of lessons from the West, which does not include drone doctrine. So now the Ukrainians are relying simply on their own efforts as a nation and as a military in order to push the drone initiative, whereas Russia now has the entire military force and doctrine pushing that effort and trying to make it a lot more synchronized on the battlefield. So I think as far as the West and even us here as citizens and prepared citizens or military or law enforcement, like you guys already have and continuously preach, to really take this to heart as like this is the future. And it's one of those things where if we don't adapt this into our plans or our training or capabilities, then we will be left by the wayside. And so go ahead, Felix.
Yeah, since you guys kind of went down this road, I want to add just two things, and that's some place or a place that we've been looking at a lot and in communication with is Israel and like what they're doing over in Gaza and that environment and how that differs. So I encourage people to look at that as well in terms of the drone utilization there. ISR is great, but what happens when you have a urban environment that's basically a city and everybody's in buildings? And how does that affect what you're doing with it? And then we're seeing a ton of CQB associated drone use over there and less of like dropping munitions, which is just interesting. The way that they're fighting is very different. There's a lot more civilians, right? So maybe putting drones into areas initially to locate civilians versus fighters. The application is very different, and it's interesting to look at that and compare that to what's happening. It's easy to get sucked into the Ukraine and what's happening over there, and I think that that's hugely important. But look at other areas of the world. Look at Africa, where they're utilizing drones in, basically just learning the lessons of what they're doing in the Ukraine. And I think just on a at-home basis, we're in for a really rude awakening with what's happening in the southern border and what will happen with inside the U.S.
Agreed 100%.
100%. Yeah.
I want to say one thing, because this is really This hits really close to home, and it's something that I think the entire U.S. military is really lagging behind, and that's drones. We're no longer living in an era, right, where dominance is dictated by the most expensive, the most cutting-edge technology exclusively, right? The fight is now about adaptability. It's about access, and the ability to flood a battlefield with really low-cost, expendable drones is proving to be a real winning strategy. The U.S. military, though, it's not looking at it. It's basically, the U.S. is saying they have the right diagnosis, but the wrong prescription. And right now, the U.S. is investing really heavily into very advanced individual drones, but these drones aren't user-friendly. They're not as compact, for example, as like even the Mavics. It's again showing that we're really bogged down by bureaucracy and outdated procurement processes. China's 2 years ahead of us. And people refuse to admit this or acknowledge this. They're 2 years ahead of us with drones, specifically infantry portable drone technology. And their approach is going to be, it's very simple: overwhelm, outproduce, and outlast. And the U.S., we're still consumed with adhering to linear procurement cycles and conducting a ridiculous amount of operational testing, which you can't have for drone warfare. Drone warfare, from software to hardware, it's evolving within, weeks. We're talking about, there's certain aspects of AVI, which is frequency hopping. I referenced it earlier in the video, but there's certain aspects of AVI that were completely uprooted and had to be revised when we were learning it. And we learned it within about a 2 to 3 week period. So, I mean, that's just an example of, one element of drone technology or nuances with drones in general that changes that rapidly. And the military right now it's almost as if it's basically, the DoD's procurement cycle is extremely slow. It's layered with approvals, it's layered with committees and testing phases, and these things stretch out for years. I'm uniquely qualified to tell you that just because I've dealt with them on the front end as a defense contractor. It's extremely, there's really high barriers of entry. And a lot of guys, as well as a lot of innovative systems, are precluded from ever even seeing the light of day. By the time a new drone design gets through testing and is finally cleared for use, the technology is it's already obsolete, even in comparison with off-the-shelf gear like your DJIs. Your DJI, Matrice, and Mavic are objectively superior to some U.S. military drones. A lot of guys running Skydios, I can promise you, if you've actually flown a Skydio, you will 100% test to the fact that the DJI has superior pilot controls. Is it a better drone? That's debatable, but there's certain quality of life features on these drones, these Chinese drones, that absolutely run circles around US ones. The military is focusing on perfection. That means every drone that they field, it has to meet really rigid, high-end specification. And that's fantastic for infantry small arms and manned air supremacy fighters like our F-35. But for drones, this just makes them more expensive, harder to produce, and less expendable. So China, on the other hand, it lets new drone designs rapidly enter service. It iterates them in real-world conditions, excuse me, and it makes them, it basically doesn't wait for these really lengthy testing cycles. I think the U.S. military has operated under the assumption that superior technology is like the final arbiter for deciding whether or not we're going to win in war or not. And the reality is warfare is proving that quantity is now just as important, if not more so than quality, specifically in the realm of drones. So I think that we really need to kind of revamp our procurement cycles. We need to also allow our infantrymen and every single MOS that's in some form of combat arms to start training on these systems. And we really need to, I would say train every infantryman as a drone operator, honestly. Make drone piloting as standard as rifle marksmanship. We have to embrace commercial technology. We have to start playing around and really, instead of focusing on countermeasures to swarms, even develop our own systems, our own swarm systems. So it's here. This drone warfare is here. It's not something that you're going to see in a Call of Duty game anymore. It's on the battlefield, and it's happening right now. And I think the U.S. military really needs to wake up and understand that cheaper drones are something that they should be looking into.
I mean, I think also as a final word to your both of your guys' points, Felix, about what's happening in Gaza and mitigating CDE or collateral damage estimates and just lowering the risk of harm to non-combatants is so important, or in a CQB application that we're really seeing that evolve in like Gaza, which I've seen some of the videos you're referencing, and it's pretty fascinating. But one of the things that I think is important for all of us, especially as citizens here in this country when it comes to the southern border, is the utilization of drones by terrorist organizations in just south of the border and use as for terror attacks against citizens. And so waking up to that reality and preparing as best you possibly can may also dictate how you go out throughout your day, what type of weapon armament you start training and practicing with in order to protect your family from the possibility of some form of attack that is very, very plausible.
Yeah, I'm specifically not going into specifics because I don't want to give ideas. But we've had these discussions specifically with federal agencies, and it's a real concern. I would say one of the hopeful aspects that I'll speak to is that for once, normally what happens is you get something out of the military and it trickles down to law enforcement, like say tourniquets, right? So cops weren't carrying tourniquets, that came back from overseas and basically the military and trickled down to law enforcement, and all of that, like, that combat medicine stuff we attribute to coming from the military. For once, it seems like some aspects of law enforcement are a little bit ahead, especially when it comes to FPV use and just general drone use. And that awareness is hopefully going to create a little bit of a cushion when we start to experience what you're talking about. I think that that's going to happen for sure. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some significant level of restriction come down on the purchasing, the use of, you have Part 107 right now, but like I would not be surprised if there's serious restrictions that come down on drone purchasing and drone use inside of the United States shortly. Because as of right now, you can buy. Go ahead.
No, I just 100% that's coming.
Yeah.
We even have we will be losing more than likely a lot of our drones this year.
I've jokingly said, but it's like the NFA of drone, things is coming at some point.
Yeah. Well, to kind of want to say thanks again for joining us, guys, Felix and Eric. Where can guys find you, especially if they have questions or want to discuss things with you, or find your guys' store to maybe pick up some equipment for themselves to be able to utilize for their preparedness?
Go ahead, Eric.
I would say just hit us up right on Instagram. We're also pretty responsive on YouTube. We're building up a presence there and hopefully going to be transitioning to X, but we're at Ascend ISR. That's our YouTube channel and our Instagram handle as well.
Same answer for me. Our Instagram is probably where we're the most active. You're most likely talking to me if you're on that. And we're on YouTube a little bit, kind of working on that. But if you need to get a hold of us, it's info@quadtacsystems.com is our email, and that'll generically get you to us. On our website, there's a drop down where you can contact us as well. But we're pretty responsive on Instagram.
So guys, make sure you go check out the description below on this video. I will have both of their social media pages as well as YouTube channels and web page stores in the description. So make sure you guys go check out QUADTAC Systems and Ascend ISR. Eric, Felix, thank you so much for your knowledge. And now I'm going to pass it back to Eric from Barrel and Hatchet. Hey guys, so hopefully you got something out of that episode and were able to kind of have a launching point as far as where to start your research or start thinking about within your group how to utilize or even construct drone teams to make you guys more capable. One of the things that's really, I think now just a fact of life when it comes to drone warfare is the coldness of the execution of life. As you guys saw in that intro short, just how kind of detached from compassion, detached from mercy that we see a lot with these drone attacks or FPV attacks, and also the psychological issues that happen most likely from PTSD after the fact. What are the repercussions of that? What are going to be the repercussions of drones being a part of warfare in the next 10, 15, 20 years removed from this time? So, you know, it really made me think about Romans chapter 12. And the reason why I thought about that is because in verse 9, it talks about love in action. And what we live in this world is a fallen state. We live in a fallen state devoid of love. The love that Christ intends for us. You know, God says that He loves us He wants us to love each other just as Christ loves us, which is a massive amount of love. But here it says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, "It's mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And this is so countercultural to everything that the world tells us to do. You know, either whether it's the mainstream media or government agencies or one group or the other is always trying to teach us to hate each other, to be against each other. Here's all the reasons why we're so different. Here's all the reasons why, you know, we need to go to war with each other or do all these things and go into a conflict where we utilize drones to just slaughter each other. And God is saying the opposite. If your enemy is hungry, give him something to eat. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. Come in together and finding common ground. Being kind, being peaceful, being humble. All of these things are so counterculture. But what we should be preparing for and what we should be training for as prepared citizens or as professionals who have high moral standards to be like, hey, I'm training to be able to keep things at bay. I'm training to be able to look out for the weak, and whenever that time comes, we can be a safe haven, or we can be the group that can go rescue others. We can be the group that can protect and deliver and defend those who are helpless, those who are in need, even if it's our enemies. Even if it's our enemies. And you know, there is nothing better of a deterrent than a prepared citizen who is trained, who's equipped, and knows what they're doing. And that's all this is about. All of this training, all of this information that we put out on videos, all of it is to make us more capable citizens, better people, people who have the Lord, who can see past this life, to see the riches and the rewards that God will give to us because we live for Him, because we have compassion, because we are people who love other people, even our enemies. And so guys, we should strive to have a warrior's heart. Yes, capable of violence if necessary, but restrained and good. And so guys, I want to say thank you so much for watching this episode. If you got through all of that, I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully you were able to kind of take away from that knowledge and maybe watch the video again to be able to kind of re-soak in, you know, if you missed something on the first half of watching it. But guys, go out there, be kind to each other, go out and train to be the eternal asset. My name is Eric, and I'll see you on the next one.